Let's talk about feet, but cool ones that are made of bronze. For those of you that have been following my channel, you will know that I've been working for many years now on piecing together a full archaic panoply, which I finally basically got completed. And one of these elements that I really wanted to have, which is basically completely forgotten and most people just full on don't know existed historically, are ancient Greek Sabotans, in this case anatomical Sabotans that are designed to look like feet. When most people think of hoplites, they typically think of classical or Hellenistic hoplites, which really don't have much additional limb armour at all. As opposed to in the archaic period, we see the addition of upper and lower arm armour, thigh armour, foot armour, even sometimes groin flaps and even ankle guards in some cases. But it seems that the feet, especially the Sabotans, really don't get any spotlight at all. And though, to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of feet, I find these really cool. I love the idea of we need to protect our feet, so we're going to make bronze feet with little hinged toes. And something else that I find just so amazing about the archaic panoply of, around the 6th century BC is that this level of armament doesn't really reappear until the medieval period. And Sabotans in the medieval period are also very, very rare. We don't typically see them on many men-at-arms, and even many knights don't wear Sabotans. And I'd like to outline that this is incredibly rare in a Hellenic context as well. The whole archaic panoply would have been essentially the knight of the ancient battlefield. You'd have been incredibly, incredibly wealthy to afford all of that extra equipment. Now, as I said, these aren't the only extra bits of armour that we see in the archaic period. We see thigh armour and arm armour, which interestingly enough fades out of use relatively quickly, and we don't really know why. This stuff only seems to have existed for around 70 years or maybe 100 years, popping up in sort of mid to late archaic period and fading out basically in the birth of the classical. Now, there are likely a few reasons to this, and there are many theories, some of which might be correct, all of which might be incorrect, or maybe a lot of them are a little bit correct here and there. In the archaic period, we are looking at a relatively different style of warfare. We're not looking at tightly compacted classical phalanxes that essentially were segregated by infantry and peltasts on the sides. We're looking at a looser style of warfare with infantry intermingled with peltasts and infantry themselves that are throwing javelins, and something that's a little bit looser, sort of a bridge between Homeric heroic warfare and tight mass formational classical warfare. That would indicate that the hoplite is more independently fighting, which might indicate why you would have more armour, as you're not fully covered and encased essentially by other people. Also, you are facing a lot of projectiles, and even this style of armour featuring the large bell, you can imagine, and this is a decently late transition in the bell cuirass, lots of bell cuirasses have a full tutu, essentially. Projectiles coming down is likely a reason for this bell. And likely, in addition, for why we see more armament in this period is not only you're facing just more projectiles directly being thrown at you, you're also having to face lots of ricocheting projectiles, splintering javelin heads and arrowheads and stones, whereas in the classical period where you're tightly mashed together in a phalanx, your arms and your legs aren't really in any danger of that when you're completely encased with essentially walls of bodies surrounding you. Another thing, which is one of the reasons that I think is the most likely that these faded out of use, is just logistically speaking, the style of war changed as well. In the archaic period, you sort of typically had landowner fighting landowner. We're told, the call for arms comes up, it's 3 days rations, 1 day you march, 1 day you fight, 1 day you come back. You're not seeing large mass campaigns really in the archaic period. There are sort of more pitched battles in local polis. You're fighting your neighbour across the mountain, which meant that, these bits of armour could have been decently easily carried to the battlefield. You would have put them on just before you fought and probably took them off as soon as you were finished. Once you start to get to large, full-scale wars and, military campaigns in the classical period, you don't really want to do long marches in these pieces of armour, as I found out at one of our recent events. We did a 3-hour long march, and for most of it I was completely fine, but eventually, of course, it wiggled loose, and I've just healed, and that was about 3 weeks ago, so it did give me a nice healthy blister. I also wasn't wearing any felted socks at the time, so maybe that was more for me. But I think that gave us a little bit of insight in that these things, and just practically speaking, when you're doing long marches in difficult terrain, you don't really want to be fully armoured. On the battlefield, absolutely, but getting to the battlefield, I want to be as little armoured as possible. And these, again, in the archaic period, would have been easy to hand off to a slave or chuck on a wagon cart because we weren't having to bring as many supplies with us for a 3-day campaign. But once you get to the classical period where you're having large military campaigns lasting weeks and months, for instance in the Peloponnesian Wars, the space that it takes and the difficulty that it takes to transport extra pieces of armour that aren't really that necessary becomes a little bit more troublesome. You're having to bring more supplies, more food, more camping equipment. The space that's used maybe to carry the extra bits of armour, you don't want to carry it on your person for long marches through mountainous terrain. They just fade out of use because logistically they don't really work anymore. Not that they weren't practical when they were used. I think that these, and through our tests, I feel very, very safe knowing that literally my entire bottom half is armoured. I've got foot, calf and thigh armour and a massive shield. You're basically not getting my legs. But it just gets to a point where your style of warfare changes away from large, heavy missiles, though of course we still see large bodies of peltasts, but it's in a different way. You're not as open and you're not literally throwing javelins at each other, which would have taken place in the archaic period, most likely. And just logistically speaking, transporting these on large military campaigns becomes a lot more troublesome than small sort of local bats between rival farmers and farmland. These are based on an archaeological find housed in the British Museum. They're either Etruscan or Greek, is actually unclear. We have a few other archaeological finds and very, very few artistic depictions of these. So these were likely incredibly rare pieces of armour. It is, of course, sculpted in true Greek manner in an anatomical way, which I think is really, really cool. And you have hinged toes that allow for motion where your foot would sort of naturally bend. And it's really, really neat because the curve of the actual sabaton itself butts up really, really close to the curve of your greave. So you actually have a very small gap here of exposed skin that likely isn't really under that much threat of being stabbed and exploited. Something else that I've actually found that I love having these for isn't necessarily bladed weapons coming to the ground, but actually the feet of my friends with hobnails, which I have had one too many toenails cracked and popped at our events when I'm not wearing any form of foot covering from even just a felted sock would help. But these have saved my feet from multiple steps and grinds with hobnailed sandals, which honestly has already made these a worthwhile investment. I just think that these are a really interesting piece of armour. They exist for relatively a small period of time, in a time period where we're seeing basically a fully harnessed, equipped hoplite. Why do they fade out of use? They seem incredibly practical for how I've experienced using them in the reenactment context. And I don't think we can ever truly know for sure, but those I think are probably likely reasons. Warfare changed, you no longer needed full coverage, you weren't as exposed, but mainly just the actual style of war changed. On large campaigns, these just became problematic to take. Anyways, I just thought I'd do a quick video on these because I think that they're quite a cool piece of armour, a piece of armour that lots of people don't really think about or associate with hoplites. If you have any questions about the Sabotans or additional piece of armour in the archaic period, I do cover them decently in depth in my Arming an Archaic Hoplite video, which I'll link in the description. I hope that you enjoyed this video. A special thanks to our channel members who continue to support the channel. If you yourself would like to support the channel, checking out our channel memberships can be a great help. We just added some new tiers actually for those of you that have very kindly asked how they can offer more support. If you can't afford that or don't want to do that, absolutely fine, no problem at all. Liking and subscribing is a massive help, and also sharing the video around to our small audience in the grand scheme of YouTube is all a great way to help this content get out to more people. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.